The night before our biggest investor meeting in company history, my phone buzzed at 11 p.m. It was my CEO, Derek Walsh. His text made my blood run cold. Handle it yourself. I'm leaving the country for a week. $6 million in missing funds, 9 board members flying in from across the nation, and our company's survival hanging by a thread. He was abandoning ship, leaving me to face the wreckage of his financial disaster alone. When those board members walked through our conference room doors the next morning asking where Derek was, I showed them his text. 3 weeks before that devastating text message, I thought I was living the American dream. My name is Barry, and at 28 years old, I had worked my way up to senior operations manager at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized software company in Austin, Texas. The company employed 230 people, and I genuinely believed we were building something meaningful together. It was a Tuesday morning when my world started unraveling. I was conducting our routine quarterly financial review, something I had done dozens of times before. The autumn sunlight streamed through my corner office windows as I scrolled through vendor payment records on my computer screen. Something felt wrong. The numbers didn't add up. I pulled up the accounts payable ledger and cross-referenced it with our vendor contracts. My coffee grew cold as I discovered payment after payment to companies I had never heard of. Pinnacle Consulting Group Strategic Solutions, LLC Innovation Partners, Inc. Each invoice was for substantial amounts ranging from $50,000 to $200,000. My hands trembled as I dug deeper. These weren't just random payments, they followed a pattern. All the invoices were signed off by Derek personally, bypassing our normal approval process. All the companies shared similar corporate structures. All the bank account information led to the same routing numbers. I printed every document, my heart pounding harder with each page. By lunchtime, I had uncovered $6 million in payments to companies that, upon closer inspection, appeared to exist only on paper. No websites, no business licenses, no physical addresses beyond P.O. boxes. The scope of what I was discovering made me feel physically sick. Derek Walsh, the man I had admired and trusted for 3 years, had been systematically stealing from our company. The falsified vendor payments were just the beginning. I found manipulated accounting records, backdated contracts, and shell companies created solely to funnel money away from TechFlow. I needed to be absolutely certain before making any accusations. I spent the afternoon calling the supposed vendor companies. Every phone number led to disconnected voicemails or answering services that had no record of the businesses. The addresses were mail forwarding services or vacant office buildings. By 5 p.m., I knew I was looking at a massive embezzlement scheme. My mentor, Sarah Fletcher, who had been with the company for 20 years, noticed my distress as she passed my office. "Barry, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her silver hair catching the light as she peered at me with concern. Sarah had taught me everything I knew about financial operations when I first started at TechFlow. I couldn't tell her what I had discovered. Not yet. I needed to approach Derek first, give him a chance to explain what had to be some kind of terrible misunderstanding. That evening, I stayed late until the office emptied out. Derek's corner office glowed with warm light as I approached the company's mission statement hanging proudly on his wall: Innovation, Integrity, Impact. The irony burned. I knocked on his door frame. "Derek, do you have a few minutes? I found some discrepancies in our vendor payments that I'd like to discuss." He looked up from his laptop, his usually confident demeanor faltering for just a moment. Derek was 45 years old with perfectly styled brown hair and the kind of practiced smile that had charmed investors and employees alike. "What kind of discrepancies?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit down. I placed the printed documents on his mahogany desk. "These vendor payments don't seem to match any contracts or services I can verify. Pinnacle Consulting alone has received over $1.2 million this year, but I can't find any record of what they actually delivered." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He picked up the papers, scanning them with what appeared to be casual interest, but I noticed his hands weren't quite steady. Barry, these are specialized consulting services that operate under confidentiality agreements. Some of our strategic initiatives require discretion, especially with the competitive landscape we're operating in. I handle these relationships personally to protect our intellectual property. His explanation sounded reasonable, but something in his tone felt rehearsed. I had worked closely with Derek for years, and I knew when he was being evasive. I understand the need for discretion, but our internal controls require documentation for all expenditures over $25,000. These payments don't have proper approval chains or supporting documentation. Derek set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. Look, I appreciate your thoroughness, but you're seeing problems where none exist. These are legitimate business expenses that go through proper channels. I need you to be very careful about making accusations that could damage relationships with our strategic partners. The word accusations hit me like a slap. I hadn't accused him of anything, merely asked for clarification. I'm not making accusations, Derek. I'm trying to understand our financial position before the quarterly board meeting. If these are legitimate expenses, I just need the proper documentation. His expression hardened. Barry, I'm going to need you to keep this conversation between us until I can get you the documentation you're looking for. These relationships are sensitive, and any premature disclosure could jeopardize deals worth millions of dollars to this company. I nodded slowly, though unease was growing in my stomach. Of course. How long do you think it will take to get the documentation? Give me 2 weeks. I'll have everything you need by then. As I left his office that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was buying time rather than providing answers. The way he had avoided eye contact when discussing the consulting relationships, the slight tremor in his voice when he mentioned confidentiality, the immediate demand for secrecy, none of it felt right. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. I decided to do some research on my own. Using publicly available databases, I traced the corporate filings for the consulting companies. What I found made my blood run cold. Every single one of the shell companies had been incorporated within the past 2 years. Every single one listed the same registered agent. Every single one had Derek Walsh listed as the primary point of contact. Monday morning brought a shocking discovery that changed everything. Tommy Chen, our IT specialist, knocked on my office door with a confused expression on his face. Barry, I was backing up the shared server over the weekend and I found some encrypted files in Derek's folder that seemed to have been accidentally copied to the public directory. I tried to move them back to his private folder, but the encryption made me curious about what they were. Tommy was a brilliant 26-year-old who had joined us straight out of Stanford. He was naturally curious about technical puzzles, sometimes to a fault. What did you find? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. He handed me a printed email chain that made me feel like the ground was falling away beneath my feet. The emails dating back 2 years detailed Derek's careful planning of the embezzlement scheme. He had researched shell company structures, studied our internal controls to find weaknesses, and even practiced forging digital signatures. One email sent to an encrypted account contained the chilling line, Phase 1 complete, 6 million extracted without detection. Phase 2 begins after board meeting. Need exit strategy prepared. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking. Derek hadn't just stolen from us. He had been planning this elaborate fraud for 2 years. Every smile, every company meeting about our bright future, every conversation about integrity and values had been a lie. Tommy watched my face carefully. Barry, what does this mean? I looked up at him, knowing that our entire company and every employee's livelihood hung in the balance. It means our CEO has been stealing from us and he's planning to disappear. The next 2 weeks became a nightmare of watching Derek systematically cover his tracks while pretending everything was normal. Armed with the knowledge of his emails, I began documenting his every suspicious move. What I witnessed was a masterclass in corporate manipulation and betrayal. Derek's behavior became increasingly erratic, though he tried to hide it behind his usual charismatic facade. He started working late into the night, claiming he was preparing for our upcoming investor meetings. But I knew better. From my office window, I could see his silhouette moving around the conference room at midnight, shredding documents and working frantically on his computer. I began staying late myself, pretending to work on quarterly reports while actually printing and hiding copies of every financial document I could access. I converted a storage closet in the basement into my secret archive using Janet Rodriguez's master key when she wasn't looking. Janet, our accounting director, had been acting nervous lately, avoiding eye contact and jumping at unexpected sounds. I suspected Derek had been pressuring her to manipulate records. During the day, Derek maintained his polished executive persona, leading strategy meetings and charming clients over lunch. But I noticed subtle changes that revealed his desperation. He had started drinking coffee constantly, his hands developing a slight tremor that he tried to hide by keeping them busy with papers or his phone. Dark circles appeared under his eyes despite his expensive concealer. The most disturbing discovery came on a Thursday evening when I was working late in the basement archive. I heard footsteps above and quickly turned off my lights, watching through the basement window as Derek moved through the offices with a large black bag. He was systematically visiting each computer terminal, inserting USB drives and downloading files. Then he would delete the original files from our servers. Ryan Morrison, our security chief, had mentioned to me earlier that week how strange it was that Derek had requested after-hours access for important client work almost every night. Ryan was a former police detective with sharp instincts, and Derek's behavior was raising red flags for him too. Something's not right about the boss, Ryan had confided to me over coffee. 20 years in law enforcement, and I know when someone's acting guilty about something. He keeps asking me about our security camera footage and whether we keep digital records of after-hours access. I realized Derek was not only stealing money, but also destroying evidence that could link him to the theft. Every deleted file, every shredded document was another piece of our company's history being erased to protect his crime. The psychological pressure of knowing what Derek was doing while maintaining a normal working relationship with him was overwhelming. During staff meetings, I watched him present quarterly projections and discuss our company's bright future, all while knowing he was planning to abandon us within weeks. His lies were so smooth, so practiced, that I began to understand how he had fooled everyone for so long. The breaking point came when Derek started targeting innocent employees to deflect suspicion from himself. Sarah Fletcher, my mentor and the most honest person I had ever known, became his first scapegoat. During a management meeting, Derek casually mentioned that he had noticed some irregularities in the accounting department that needed investigation. He suggested that Sarah's long tenure and deep access to financial systems made her a person of interest. The way he said it with feigned reluctance and concern was masterful manipulation. I hate to even bring this up, Derek said, his voice heavy with fake sadness. But we have a fiduciary responsibility to investigate any potential financial irregularities. Sarah has been under some personal financial stress lately with her husband's medical bills, and she has access to many of our payment systems. I felt sick listening to him destroy Sarah's reputation with calculated lies. Sarah's husband had been battling cancer for 6 months, and their medical expenses were indeed substantial. Derek was weaponizing her personal tragedy to make her appear desperate enough to steal. After the meeting, I confronted Derek in his office. Sarah Fletcher is the most honest person in this company. You know she would never steal anything. His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a cold calculation underneath. Barry, I understand you're fond of Sarah, but we can't let personal relationships cloud our judgment when it comes to financial security. The evidence suggests someone in accounting has been manipulating our vendor payments, and Sarah has the access and opportunity. What evidence? I demanded. You're the one who signed off on all those questionable vendor payments. Derek's eyes narrowed dangerously. I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making. My signature authority exists for legitimate business purposes. If someone has been forging my approvals or manipulating the approval process, that's exactly the kind of internal fraud we need to investigate. The casual way he suggested that someone might have forged his approvals chilled me to the bone. He was already preparing to claim that his digital signatures had been compromised, setting up innocent employees to take the blame for his crimes. Derek, you personally told me these were legitimate consulting expenses. You said you handled these relationships directly. He leaned back in his chair with a cold smile. I said I would look into your concerns about documentation. I never confirmed that all those payments were legitimate. If there are fraudulent transactions using forged approvals, that's exactly what an internal investigation would uncover. I left his office that day knowing that Derek was not just a thief, but a sociopath willing to destroy innocent lives to protect himself. The realization that I had worked closely with such a person for 3 years made me question my own judgment about everything. That evening, I discovered the most damning evidence yet. Tommy Chen approached me nervously as I was preparing to leave the office. Barry, I found something else while running security updates on our financial servers. Derek has been using administrator privileges to alter transaction logs and delete audit trails, but our backup systems keep shadow copies that he doesn't know about. Tommy showed me digital evidence that Derek had been systematically modifying financial records to hide his theft. Bank transfer records had been altered, vendor payment approvals had been backdated, and audit trails had been completely erased from our primary systems. The scary part, Tommy continued, is that he's been doing this for months. He knows our systems better than I thought. Someone taught him how to manipulate our financial databases without leaving obvious traces. The implication was clear. Derek hadn't learned these sophisticated techniques on his own. He had either hired someone to help him or had done this before at another company. The scope of his planning and the technical sophistication of his methods suggested this wasn't his first corporate theft. I spent that weekend copying everything Tommy had found onto encrypted drives hidden in my apartment. I was building a comprehensive case file, but I had no idea who I could trust with it. Derek held too much power within the company, and his manipulation skills were too advanced for me to risk exposing him prematurely. Lisa Grant, Derek's executive assistant, confirmed my worst fears on Monday morning. She approached me in the break room looking exhausted and stressed. "Barry, can I talk to you confidentially?" she asked, glancing around nervously. Lisa had been Derek's assistant for 5 years and was usually calm and professional. Seeing her this agitated was alarming. "Derek has been asking me to do things that don't feel right," she said quietly. "He wants me to prepare personnel files for Sarah Fletcher, Janet Rodriguez, and 3 other accounting staff members. He says HR is conducting a routine review, but he's specifically asked for their banking information, personal financial records, and access logs." My heart sank. Derek was building cases against multiple innocent employees, gathering personal information that he could use to make them appear guilty of financial crimes. He also had me research employment law regarding termination for cause and recovery of stolen assets from employee bank accounts, Lisa continued. "Barry, I think he's planning to fire people and claim they stole money." The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. Derek wasn't just planning to disappear with $6 million. He was planning to frame innocent employees for the theft, destroying their careers and potentially subjecting them to criminal prosecution while he escaped to a non-extradition country. That afternoon brought the discovery that changed everything. While Derek was out of the office for a supposed client meeting, I used my administrative access to check our international banking connections. What I found made my hands shake so badly I could barely type. Derek had opened accounts with 3 different banks in the Cayman Islands. Over the past 6 months, he had transferred nearly $3 million out of our domestic accounts using a complex series of currency exchanges and shell company transfers. The money was already gone, sitting in offshore accounts beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. But the most chilling discovery was Derek's airline confirmation. He had a first-class ticket to Georgetown, Cayman Islands booked for the day after our investor meeting. One way, no return date. Derek wasn't just planning to steal from us and frame innocent employees. He was planning to disappear entirely, leaving us all to deal with the aftermath of his crimes while he lived comfortably on our stolen money in a country that didn't extradite financial criminals to the United States. As I sat in my office that evening, watching Derek work late in his office across the hall, I realized I was probably the only person who understood the full scope of his plan. The weight of that knowledge was crushing. 230 jobs, Sarah's retirement, Janet's career, our client's trust, our company's future. Everything hung in the balance. I had less than a week before Derek would execute his final escape plan, and I had no idea how to stop him. 2 weeks before the investor meeting, Derek made an announcement that confirmed my worst fears about his plan. During our weekly management meeting, he delivered the news with his characteristic confident smile. "I've decided that Barry will be presenting our financial reports to the board instead of me," he said, gesturing toward me with apparent pride. "She's been doing exceptional work on our quarterly analysis, and I think it's time for her to get the recognition she deserves." The other managers smiled and offered congratulations, but I felt like I was drowning. Derek was positioning me as the face of our financial operations just as the missing $6 million was about to be discovered. When the board realized the scope of the theft, I would be the obvious suspect. "Derek, I appreciate the confidence, but shouldn't you be presenting since you signed off on most of the major expenditures this quarter?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile never wavered. "That's exactly why you're the perfect choice. You have the detailed knowledge of every transaction and can speak to the operational efficiency behind our spending decisions. I'll be handling the strategic overview and future planning portions of the meeting." After the meeting, Derek pulled me aside with what appeared to be fatherly concern. "Barry, I know this is a big responsibility, but I have complete confidence in you. You understand our financial position better than anyone except me, and your fresh perspective will impress the board." The manipulation was masterful. He was simultaneously elevating my profile and setting me up to take the fall when his crimes were exposed. Every compliment, every expression of confidence was another link in the chain he was wrapping around my career and reputation. That afternoon, I discovered Derek had been even more thorough in his planning than I had imagined. Tommy Chen found me in the break room with a troubled expression. "Barry, something weird is happening with our network security. Someone has been accessing your user account from Derek's computer, but the login times show you were in meetings or out of the office. Either someone cloned your credentials or Derek has been impersonating you in our systems." My blood ran cold. "What kind of access?" "Financial database queries, vendor payment approvals, bank transfer authorizations, all using your digital signature, but the metadata shows the commands came from Derek's workstation." Derek had been systematically using my credentials to authorize his fraudulent transactions. Every stolen dollar would appear to have been approved by me, creating an electronic paper trail that would convince any investigator of my guilt. I spent the next few days watching Derek's manipulation campaign unfold with growing horror. He began making subtle comments about my work performance in front of other managers, planting seeds of doubt about my competence and judgment. "I'm a little concerned about some of Barry's recent decisions," he mentioned during a strategy meeting. "She's been questioning some of our vendor relationships and seems confused about our approval processes. I wonder if the pressure of the upcoming board presentation is affecting her judgment." Nancy Wright, our legal counsel, took notice of Derek's concerns. Nancy was a sharp attorney who had been with TechFlow for 6 years, but Derek had been carefully grooming her perspective for weeks. "Should we be worried about the financial presentation if Barry is having performance issues?" Nancy asked. Derek shook his head with feigned reluctance. "I hope not, but I've noticed some irregularities in her recent work. She seems to think she found problems with vendor payments that are actually perfectly legitimate. I'm concerned she might present inaccurate information to the board." The psychological warfare was devastating. Derek was systematically destroying my credibility while positioning himself as the concerned executive trying to protect the company from my supposed incompetence. Anyone listening to these conversations would naturally question my reliability and trustworthiness. The attacks became more direct when Derek started receiving anonymous tips about financial irregularities. Of course, he was sending these tips to himself, but they gave him the perfect excuse to launch an investigation targeting me. Michael Stevens, one of our board members, called Derek after receiving an anonymous email claiming that someone in our finance department had been embezzling funds through fake vendor payments. The email specifically mentioned my access to approval systems and suggested that Derek investigate my recent activities. Derek shared this conversation with Nancy Wright and Patricia Hawkins from HR, expressing deep concern about the allegations. I hate to believe this about Barry, but the anonymous tip contains very specific information about our vendor payment processes. Someone with inside knowledge is making these accusations. Patricia, who had always been fair and professional in her dealings with employees, was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Derek, anonymous accusations are hard to investigate without concrete evidence. What exactly are they claiming Barry has done? Derek produced a folder of documents that made my heart stop. They were printouts of the fraudulent vendor payments, but every document showed my forged digital signature as the authorizing agent. He had spent weeks perfecting his forgeries, and the evidence looked damning. The anonymous tip led me to discover these irregularities, Derek said with convincing sadness. All these payments to questionable vendors were authorized using Barry's credentials. I've been hoping there was an innocent explanation, but the pattern is very concerning. Nancy examined the documents with her attorney's eye for detail. These signatures look legitimate, and the authorization codes match Barry's access level. If these vendor payments are fraudulent, she had the means and opportunity to execute them. I wasn't present for this conversation, but Patricia told me about it later as part of HR's preliminary investigation. Hearing how convincing Derek's evidence appeared even to people who knew me well made me realize how carefully he had planned my downfall. The final blow came when Derek filed a formal complaint with HR alleging that I had been embezzling company funds and doctoring financial records. He claimed he had discovered the theft while preparing for the board meeting and felt obligated to report it immediately. Patricia called me into her office on a Friday afternoon with the grave expression of someone delivering terrible news. Barry, I need to inform you that serious allegations have been made about your handling of company finances. Derek has provided evidence suggesting you may have been involved in fraudulent vendor payments totaling several $1,000,000. I sat in shocked silence as she outlined the charges against me. Every piece of evidence Derek had fabricated pointed to my guilt. The forged digital signatures, the suspicious timing of transactions, the anonymous tips, even my recent questions about vendor payments, everything had been twisted into proof of criminal activity. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending a full investigation, Patricia continued. Your access to all company systems has been revoked, and you're prohibited from contacting vendors, clients, or discussing this matter with other employees. As I cleaned out my office under Patricia's supervision, Derek appeared with what looked like genuine concern and disappointment. Barry, I want you to know how difficult this is for me. I considered you one of my most trusted managers, but when evidence of financial irregularities came to light, I had to prioritize the company's welfare. The performance was flawless. Anyone watching would see a caring CEO forced to take action against a valued employee who had betrayed his trust. Derek's eyes even appeared moist with emotion as he spoke about his disappointment in my supposed crimes. I hope the investigation will clear up any misunderstandings, he continued. But until then, I have to protect our other employees and our fiduciary responsibilities to investors. Walking out of the TechFlow offices that evening with my personal belongings in a cardboard box, I felt completely alone. Derek had successfully isolated me from my colleagues, destroyed my credibility, and positioned himself as the victim of my supposed betrayal. The $6 million theft would soon be discovered, and all the evidence pointed to me as the perpetrator. But Derek had made one critical mistake. His assumption that I would crumble under pressure and accept defeat showed he had never truly understood the person he was trying to destroy. As I drove home that Friday evening, I wasn't thinking about how to defend myself against his accusations. I was thinking about how to destroy him completely. The following Monday morning brought Derek's most devastating attack yet. I was at home, officially suspended and barred from the office, when Patricia Hawkins called with news that made me feel physically sick. Barry, I need to inform you that we've escalated the investigation based on additional evidence that's come to light. Derek has provided recorded conversations that appear to show your involvement in the fraudulent vendor payments. My hands trembled as I held the phone. What recorded conversations? Derek says he became suspicious about the vendor payments several weeks ago and started documenting his conversations with you about them. He has audio recordings of you discussing the fake consulting companies and appearing to defend their legitimacy when he questioned them. The calculating cruelty of Derek's plan took my breath away. He had been secretly recording our conversations for months, carefully editing them to remove his own incriminating statements while preserving my words out of context. When I had asked him about the vendor payments, my questions and comments had been twisted to sound like confessions of guilt. Patricia, those recordings have to be edited or taken out of context. I was asking Derek about those vendor payments because I couldn't verify their legitimacy, not because I created them. I understand your position, Barry, but the recordings are quite clear. We're going to need you to come in for a formal interview with our external legal team. Given the severity of the allegations, we may also need to involve law enforcement. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the morning sunlight streaming through my windows, trying to process the magnitude of Derek's betrayal. He hadn't just stolen $6 million and framed me for the crime. He had been planning my destruction for months, recording our conversations and manipulating my words to create false evidence of my guilt. The psychological impact of realizing someone I had trusted and admired had been systematically plotting my downfall was devastating. Every friendly conversation, every piece of career advice, every expression of confidence in my abilities had been part of his elaborate deception. That afternoon, Tommy Chen called me from his personal phone, speaking in hushed tones. Barry, I can't talk long because HR told everyone not to contact you, but I needed you to know something important. Derek had me run a security audit on our phone systems last week, claiming he was worried about unauthorized access. But what he was really doing was covering his tracks on the recorded conversations. What do you mean? Our phone system automatically logs all recordings and stores metadata about when calls were made and from which extensions. Derek had me purge the system logs older than 30 days, claiming it was for storage optimization. But I think he was destroying evidence that would show when and how he made those recordings of your conversations. The implication was clear. Derek had not only recorded our conversations without my knowledge, but he had also eliminated the digital evidence that would prove the recordings had been edited and manipulated. His technical knowledge of our systems was far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Tommy, you need to be careful. Derek is dangerous, and if he thinks you know too much about what he's doing, you could become his next target. I know, but I couldn't let him destroy you with fake evidence. Barry, everyone in the office knows you're innocent. Derek might be able to fool the board and the lawyers, but those of us who work with you every day know you would never steal from the company. The support from Tommy meant everything to me, but I also knew that Derek's manipulation was so sophisticated that good intentions wouldn't be enough to save me. I needed concrete evidence of his crimes, and I was running out of time to find it. That evening brought a call that changed everything. David Park, a former TechFlow employee who had left 6 months earlier, reached out after hearing about my suspension through industry contacts. Barry, I know what you're going through because Derek did the same thing to me at his previous company, David said. I was the CFO at Meridian Systems when Derek was VP of Operations. He embezzled over $2 million and framed me for the theft. I lost my career, my reputation, and nearly went to prison before the truth came out. My heart raced as David described a pattern of behavior identical to what Derek was doing to me. The fake vendor payments, the forged approvals, the systematic character assassination, the recorded conversations taken out of context. Derek had used the same playbook before. How did you prove your innocence? I got lucky. Derek made a mistake and left digital evidence on his personal laptop that proved he was the real thief. But by then, the damage to my reputation was so severe that I couldn't find work in corporate finance anymore. I'm working as a freelance consultant now, barely making ends meet. David's story filled me with both hope and terror. Hope because it proved Derek's pattern of behavior could be exposed, and terror because it showed the devastating long-term consequences even for innocent victims who were eventually vindicated. David, would you be willing to testify about Derek's previous crimes if I can find a way to prove what he's doing now? Absolutely. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to hold him accountable. Derek destroyed my life, and I want to make sure he doesn't do it to anyone else. Armed with this new information, I started researching Derek's employment history more thoroughly. Using public records and LinkedIn connections, I traced his career back 15 years and found a disturbing pattern. Derek had worked at 4 different companies over that period, and at each one he had left under suspicious circumstances involving financial irregularities. At Peterson Technologies, an employee had been fired for alleged embezzlement 6 months before Derek left for a better opportunity. At Innovation Dynamics, 2 accountants had been terminated for supposed vendor payment fraud shortly before Derek moved on to his next position. The pattern was consistent and damning. Derek was a serial corporate predator who moved from company to company, stealing money and destroying innocent employees' careers to cover his tracks. TechFlow wasn't his first victim, and I wouldn't be his last if he succeeded in escaping to the Cayman Islands. Wednesday morning brought the news I had been dreading. Patricia called to inform me that the investigation had found enough evidence to recommend criminal charges. Barry, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to turn our findings over to the police. The district attorney's office will decide whether to pursue prosecution, but the evidence is quite substantial. Patricia, please listen to me. Derek Walsh is a serial embezzler who has done this at multiple companies. I can prove that he's been planning this theft for 2 years and that he's systematically framed innocent employees at his previous jobs. I understand you're upset, but making counter-accusations isn't going to help your situation. If you have concrete evidence of wrongdoing by Derek, you should present it to the police through your attorney. After hanging up, I realized that Derek had isolated me so effectively that even reasonable people like Patricia couldn't see past his manipulation. The evidence against me appeared overwhelming while Derek remained above suspicion as the concerned CEO who had uncovered my supposed crimes. That afternoon, I made the decision that would ultimately save not just my career, but potentially dozens of future victims. I called Amanda Bell, an attorney who specialized in corporate whistleblower cases. Amanda listened to my story with the skeptical attention of someone who had heard many similar claims from disgruntled employees. But as I provided more details about Derek's pattern of behavior and the sophisticated nature of his fraud scheme, her tone became increasingly serious. Barry, if what you're telling me is true, Derek Walsh is operating a complex criminal enterprise that spans multiple states and companies. This isn't just embezzlement, it's organized fraud on a massive scale. Can you help me prove it? We can try, but we're going to need to move fast. If Derek is planning to leave the country after your board meeting, we have less than a week to gather evidence and contact law enforcement, and we're going to need more than testimony from previous victims. We need hard evidence of the current crimes. That evening, I sat in my apartment surrounded by printed documents, bank records, and corporate filings, preparing for what might be my only chance to expose Derek's crimes and save my own future. The board meeting was in 6 days, and Derek's flight to the Cayman Islands was scheduled for the day after that. I had 1 week to take down a sophisticated criminal who had been planning this fraud for 2 years and had successfully destroyed careers at multiple companies. The odds seemed impossible, but I had something Derek didn't expect: the knowledge of his pattern and the determination of someone who had nothing left to lose. As I worked late into the night organizing evidence and planning my counterattack, I couldn't have imagined that Derek was about to make the critical mistake that would hand me the victory I desperately needed. With my suspension in effect and the board meeting just days away, I transformed my apartment into a war room. Every surface was covered with documents, financial records, and corporate filings as Amanda Bell and I built the case that would either save my career or send me to prison for crimes I didn't commit. Amanda had brought in Dr. Elizabeth Torres, a forensic accountant with 30 years of experience in corporate fraud cases. Elizabeth's expertise in financial analysis was exactly what we needed to prove Derek's elaborate scheme, but the clock was working against us. The sophistication of this fraud is remarkable, Dr. Torres said as she examined the vendor payment records. Derek created shell companies with believable corporate structures, established banking relationships that would pass casual scrutiny, and manipulated your internal systems to hide the theft. This level of planning suggests he's done this before. I confirmed sharing David Park's testimony about Derek's previous crimes at Meridian Systems. David is willing to testify, and I've found similar patterns at 2 other companies where Derek worked. Amanda reviewed the criminal records I had uncovered. This establishes a pattern of behavior, but we need proof of the current crimes. The forged digital signatures are good evidence, but Derek could claim his own systems were compromised by hackers or disgruntled employees. The challenge we faced was enormous. Derek had spent 2 years creating false evidence that pointed to my guilt while carefully covering his own tracks. Every document, every transaction record, every piece of digital evidence had been manipulated to support his narrative that I was the embezzler. We need to find something Derek doesn't know we have, Dr. Torres suggested. Some piece of evidence he couldn't manipulate or destroy because he didn't know it existed. That breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Robert Kane, a private investigator Amanda had worked with on previous corporate cases, had been tracing Derek's offshore banking connections. His discovery changed everything. Derek made a critical mistake with his Cayman Islands accounts, Robert explained during an emergency meeting at Amanda's office. He used the same email address to communicate with the offshore banks that he uses for his LinkedIn account and other professional platforms. I was able to trace communications between Derek and 3 different Cayman banks dating back 18 months. Robert spread out printed emails that showed Derek personally negotiating the opening of offshore accounts, discussing wire transfer procedures, and providing detailed instructions for moving large amounts of money out of the United States without triggering federal reporting requirements. These emails prove Derek has been planning this theft since before you even started questioning the vendor payments, Amanda said. He couldn't have forged these communications or manipulated them to frame you because they predate any suspicion about the missing money. The evidence was damning, but we still face the challenge of presenting it to authorities who had already accepted Derek's version of events. The local police, the district attorney's office, and even TechFlow's board had been primed to see me as the guilty party. Dr. Torres had an idea that could change the dynamic completely. Instead of trying to convince people that Derek is lying, we should let him expose himself. If we can create a situation where Derek has to respond to unexpected evidence, his reaction might reveal his guilt to people who are currently supporting him. What kind of situation? I asked. Derek doesn't know we found his offshore banking communications. If we can confront him with that evidence in front of witnesses, his response will either prove his innocence or confirm his guilt. Innocent people react with confusion and curiosity when presented with evidence of crimes they didn't commit. Guilty people react with prepared explanations and defensive anger. Amanda nodded thoughtfully. The board meeting could be the perfect opportunity. Derek expects to control that narrative completely with Barry absent and suspended. If we can present the real evidence to the board members directly, Derek's reaction will be very telling. The plan that emerged was risky but brilliant. Instead of trying to clear my name through traditional legal channels that Derek had already manipulated, we would expose his crimes in real time during the board meeting. The 9 board members would see both the evidence of Derek's fraud and his reaction to being caught. The key is timing, Robert explained. Derek is planning to disappear immediately after the meeting. If we wait until afterward to present evidence, he'll already be gone. We need to trap him during the meeting itself. Preparing for this confrontation required careful coordination. Amanda would attend the meeting as my legal representative, claiming she was there to address the allegations against me. Dr. Torres would present the forensic accounting evidence as an independent expert. Robert would provide the investigative findings about Derek's offshore accounts. What about me? I asked. I'm suspended and banned from the office. Amanda smiled grimly. You're going to be there as the primary witness. Derek has built his entire defense around your supposed guilt. When you appear with evidence of his crimes, his carefully constructed narrative will collapse in real time. The 2 days before the board meeting were a frenzy of preparation. We organized evidence folders for each board member, prepared presentation slides that would clearly show Derek's fraud scheme, and coordinated with David Park to provide video testimony about Derek's previous crimes. Tommy Chen provided crucial technical support, helping us understand exactly how Derek had manipulated our computer systems to hide his theft. Derek used administrative privileges to alter database records, but our backup systems maintain shadow copies he doesn't know about, Tommy explained. I can demonstrate in real time how he changed transaction records to frame Barry. The night before the board meeting, Derek sent the text message that would ultimately destroy him. Handle it yourself. I'm leaving the country for a week. When I received that message at 11 p.m., I felt a mixture of rage and vindication. Derek was abandoning the company and all the employees who trusted him, just as he had done at his previous companies. But this time, his cowardly escape would provide the final piece of evidence we needed to prove his guilt. This is perfect, Amanda said when I forwarded Derek's text. He's literally confessing to abandoning his responsibilities in the middle of a financial crisis. No innocent CEO would send that message the night before the most important board meeting in company history. Dr. Torres agreed. Derek's text message proves he knows about the missing $6 million and is fleeing rather than facing questions about it. Combined with his offshore banking communications and his pattern of previous fraud, this creates an overwhelming case for his guilt. As I tried to sleep that night, knowing that the next day would determine not just my future, but the future of 230 innocent employees, I felt a strange sense of calm. For 6 weeks, I had been reacting to Derek's attacks, defending myself against his accusations, and watching helplessly as he destroyed my reputation. Tomorrow, I would finally go on the offensive. The morning of the board meeting arrived with unseasonable clarity, as if nature itself wanted to ensure there would be no ambiguity about what was going to unfold. I arrived at the TechFlow offices at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the 9 board members were scheduled to convene for what they believed would be a routine quarterly review. Amanda Bell, Dr. Elizabeth Torres, and Robert Kane met me in the parking lot, each carrying briefcases filled with evidence that would either vindicate me completely or destroy my life forever. The weight of that moment was almost overwhelming, but I felt a steel resolve that had been building for weeks. Remember, Derek doesn't know we're coming, Amanda reminded me as we approached the building. His entire plan depends on you being absent and unable to defend yourself. When we walk into that conference room, we're going to shatter his carefully constructed narrative. Ryan Morrison, our security chief, was waiting for us at the main entrance. Over the past week, Amanda had briefed him on Derek's crimes, and Ryan's law enforcement background made him an invaluable ally in our effort to expose the truth. The board members started arriving 15 minutes ago, Ryan reported. Derek hasn't shown up yet, which is unusual since he's normally here an hour before important meetings. His assistant Lisa says she hasn't heard from him this morning. Dr. Torres checked her watch. Derek's flight to the Cayman Islands doesn't leave until this afternoon. He's probably at home right now preparing for his escape and assuming this meeting will go exactly as he planned. We made our way to the conference room where the 9 board members were gathered, reviewing quarterly reports and discussing the agenda. Victoria Stone, the board chairwoman, looked up with surprise as our group entered. Barry, I wasn't expecting to see you today given your suspension status, and I don't believe we've met your companions. Amanda stepped forward with professional confidence. Ms. Stone, I'm Amanda Bell representing Barry in the allegations against her. These are Dr. Elizabeth Torres, forensic accountant, and Robert Kane, private investigator. We're here because we have evidence that the charges against Barry are false and that the real perpetrator of the $6 million theft is Derek Walsh himself. The room fell silent. The board members exchanged glances that ranged from skeptical to concerned to curious. Michael Stevens, who had received the anonymous tips about my supposed crimes, spoke first. That's a very serious accusation. What evidence do you have to support such a claim? Dr. Torres opened her briefcase and began distributing evidence folders to each board member. What you're looking at is a comprehensive forensic analysis of TechFlow's financial records over the past 2 years. The evidence shows a sophisticated embezzlement scheme orchestrated by Derek Walsh, including the creation of shell companies' manipulation of digital signatures and systematic theft of company funds. As the board members opened their folders, their expressions began to change. The first documents showed the fake vendor payments I had originally discovered, but now they were presented with analysis proving that Derek had personally created the shell companies and controlled their bank accounts. These corporate filings show that Derek Walsh is the registered agent for all 6 of the supposed consulting companies that received fraudulent payments, Dr. Torres explained. The bank signature cards for these companies match Derek's handwriting, and the corporate addresses all lead to mail forwarding services that Derek personally established. Robert Kane presented the next piece of evidence. Mr. Walsh has been communicating with banks in the Cayman Islands for 18 months, establishing offshore accounts and arranging for the transfer of stolen funds. These email communications show detailed planning of the theft and preparation for his escape from the United States. The board members were stunned into silence as they reviewed email after email showing Derek's personal involvement in setting up offshore accounts and moving stolen money out of the country. His own words in his own emails provided undeniable proof of his guilt. Amanda presented the most damning evidence last. Yesterday evening, Mr. Walsh sent this text message to Barry, abandoning his responsibilities and fleeing the country rather than face accountability for his crimes. She read Derek's text message aloud. "Handle it yourself. I'm leaving the country for a week." The impact on the board members was immediate and dramatic. Several of them sat back in their chairs. Others shook their heads in disbelief, and one muttered an expression of disgust under her breath. Derek knew about this board meeting for 3 months, Victoria Stone said, her voice filled with anger. The idea that he would abandon his responsibilities and leave the country at such a critical time is absolutely unthinkable for any legitimate CEO. Michael Stevens examined the offshore banking communications more closely. These emails are from Derek's personal email account, and they discuss moving millions of dollars to accounts he personally controls. There's no innocent explanation for this level of planning and secrecy. At that moment, Derek's phone began ringing in the conference room. Victoria answered it, putting the call on speakerphone. "Derek, where are you?" "The board meeting started 20 minutes ago, and we have some very serious questions about the company's financial position." Derek's voice came through the speaker with forced casualness that didn't match the gravity of the situation. "Victoria, I'm dealing with a family emergency that came up suddenly. Barry should be able to handle the financial presentation without any problems." "Derek, Barry is here, and she's presented evidence that you've been embezzling money from the company and framing her for your crimes. We need you to return to the office immediately to address these allegations." The silence on Derek's end of the phone call lasted so long that we wondered if the connection had been lost. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely, losing its confident tone and becoming defensive and angry. "That's absolutely ridiculous. Barry is facing criminal charges for embezzling $6 million from this company. Any accusations she's making are desperate attempts to deflect blame from her own crimes." Amanda leaned toward the phone. "Mr. Walsh, This is Amanda Bell Berry's attorney. We have documentary evidence that you personally established offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and transferred stolen company funds to those accounts. We also have evidence that you've committed similar crimes at 3 previous companies. Another long silence. When Derek spoke again, his voice was shaking with barely controlled panic. I don't know what kind of fabricated evidence you think you have, but I'm not going to participate in this witch hunt. My attorney will be contacting the board about this harassment. The phone call ended abruptly, leaving the conference room in stunned silence. Derek's reaction had been everything Dr. Torres had predicted. Defensive anger, prepared excuses, and immediate threats of legal action rather than the confusion and curiosity an innocent person would have shown. Victoria Stone looked around the table at her fellow board members. I think we've heard enough to know what our next steps need to be. She picked up her phone and dialed a number from memory. Agent Walsh, this is Victoria Stone from TechFlow Solutions. We need FBI assistance immediately for a major corporate fraud case. The perpetrator may be attempting to flee the country today. As Victoria provided details to the FBI, Tommy Chen arrived with laptop computers that would demonstrate exactly how Derek had manipulated our financial systems to hide his theft and frame me for his crimes. Derek used administrator privileges to alter database records and delete audit trails, Tommy explained to the board members. But our backup systems maintain shadow copies that prove Barry's digital signatures were forged and that Derek personally authorized all the fraudulent payments. The technical demonstration was devastating to any remaining doubt about Derek's guilt. The board members could see in real time how Derek had used sophisticated computer manipulation to create false evidence against me while hiding his own criminal activities. Robert Kane provided the final piece of the puzzle. Derek Walsh has a first-class ticket to Georgetown, Cayman Islands, departing this afternoon at 3 p.m. He's not planning to return. This was always intended to be his final theft before disappearing permanently. Victoria Stone stood up with the expression of someone who had seen enough evidence to make a definitive decision. I'm calling an emergency vote to immediately terminate Derek Walsh and remove all his access to company systems and accounts. All in favor. The vote was unanimous. 9 hands raised without hesitation. Motion carried. Barry, on behalf of this board, I want to apologize for the ordeal you've been put through and thank you for your courage in exposing this fraud. Without your investigation and persistence, Derek would have succeeded in stealing our money and destroying innocent people's careers. As I sat in that conference room surrounded by evidence of Derek's crimes and finally vindicated after weeks of character assassination and false accusations, I felt a combination of relief, satisfaction, and determination. The fight wasn't over yet, but the momentum had shifted completely in favor of justice. Derek Walsh's reign of corporate terror was about to end. The FBI moved with impressive speed once they understood the scope of Derek's crimes and his imminent flight risk. Agent Kevin Walsh, ironically sharing Derek's last name, arrived at TechFlow within 2 hours of Victoria's call, bringing a team of financial crime specialists who immediately began securing evidence and coordinating with international law enforcement. Cases like this are exactly why we have agreements with Cayman Islands authorities, Agent Walsh explained to the board. Mr. Derek Walsh may think he's planned the perfect escape, but international banking regulations require cooperation with U.S. law enforcement in cases involving stolen funds. While the FBI worked to freeze Derek's offshore accounts, Marcus Rivera from our bank's fraud department called with news that validated our strategy of working with financial institutions ahead of time. Barry, those transaction alerts you helped us set up last week just prevented Derek from transferring the remaining $3 million this morning, Marcus reported. He tried to execute a wire transfer to his Cayman accounts at 8 a.m., but our systems flagged it as suspicious and put a hold on the funds. Dr. Torres smiled grimly as she calculated the implications. Derek's final theft attempt was blocked, which means we can recover almost all of the stolen money. His desperation to grab that last $3 million before fleeing will actually help convict him. The board members were amazed by the comprehensive planning that had gone into Derek's crimes and equally impressed by the thorough investigation that had exposed them. Michael Stevens, who had initially believed Derek's accusations against me, was particularly apologetic. Barry, I owe you a profound apology. Derek's manipulation was so sophisticated that even experienced business leaders like myself were completely fooled. Your persistence in investigating the truth, even when facing false accusations, prevented a massive injustice. Agent Walsh provided regular updates throughout the morning as his team coordinated Derek's capture. Airport security has been notified to detain Mr. Walsh if he attempts to board his flight. We also have units positioned at his home and known associates' residences. Given the evidence you've provided, he'll be facing federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The psychological relief of having law enforcement take Derek seriously and treat me as a victim rather than a suspect was overwhelming. For weeks, I had felt like the entire system was working against me, with Derek's lies and manipulation turning everyone I trusted into potential enemies. Tommy Chen provided crucial technical assistance to the FBI team, demonstrating how Derek had manipulated our computer systems and helping them preserve digital evidence that would be essential for prosecution. Derek was very sophisticated in his technical approach, Tommy explained to Agent Walsh, but he made the mistake of thinking he understood our backup systems better than he actually did. Every change he made to hide his crimes was automatically recorded in shadow databases he didn't know existed. At 2:15 p.m., just 45 minutes before Derek's scheduled flight to the Cayman Islands, Agent Walsh received the call we had all been waiting for. We have him in custody at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Mr. Walsh was attempting to board the plane with false identification documents and over $200,000 in cash. The conference room erupted in applause and expressions of relief. Derek's criminal enterprise had finally been stopped and justice was about to be served. Sarah Fletcher, my mentor, who Derek had tried to frame for his crimes, arrived at the office as news of Derek's arrest spread through the company. The relief and vindication in her eyes brought tears to my own. Barry, I knew you were innocent from the moment Derek started making accusations, Sarah said, embracing me with genuine emotion. Your character and integrity were never in doubt for those of us who really know you. The reunion with Sarah and other colleagues who had supported me throughout the ordeal was deeply moving. Janet Rodriguez, our accounting director, who had been pressured by Derek to manipulate records, apologized for not speaking up sooner about his suspicious requests. Derek threatened to fire me if I questioned his instructions, Janet explained. He said the vendor payments were part of confidential strategic initiatives that required discretion. I should have realized something was wrong, but he was very convincing. Patricia Hawkins from HR also apologized for the way the investigation had been handled. Derek presented such compelling evidence against you that it seemed impossible to ignore, but seeing how he manipulated all of us makes me realize how sophisticated his deception really was. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Derek's criminal network became clear. The FBI investigation revealed that he had stolen over $12 million from 4 different companies over 8 years, destroying the careers of 6 innocent employees who had been framed for his crimes. David Park, the CFO, whose career Derek had destroyed at Meridian Systems, flew to Austin to testify before the grand jury. Seeing Derek finally face justice for his crimes gives me hope that the other victims can rebuild their lives and reputations, David said. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Between the frozen offshore accounts, the blocked wire transfers, and asset seizures from Derek's personal accounts, TechFlow recovered $5.8 million of the $6 million he had stolen. The remaining $200,000 was considered a small price to pay for exposing and stopping such a sophisticated criminal operation. 3 months after Derek's arrest, the board of directors made an announcement that changed my life completely. Victoria Stone called a company-wide meeting to address our future leadership structure. After extensive deliberation and consultation with executive search firms, the board has decided to name Barry as our permanent CEO, Victoria announced. Her courage in exposing Derek's crimes, her thorough understanding of our operations, and her demonstrated leadership during this crisis make her the ideal choice to guide TechFlow's future. The promotion from Senior Operations Manager to CEO represented more than just career advancement. It was validation that integrity and courage could triumph over manipulation and corruption, even when the odds seemed impossible. My first initiative as CEO was implementing comprehensive financial controls and transparency measures that would prevent future fraud while protecting innocent employees from false accusations. We established independent oversight of all vendor relationships, mandatory rotation of financial responsibilities, and whistleblower protections for anyone reporting suspicious activities. Sarah Fletcher, who had planned to retire before Derek's frame-up attempt, agreed to stay on as senior financial advisor, helping implement the new controls and mentoring other employees. "This company gave me a career for 20 years," she said. "After what we've been through, I want to make sure future employees never face the kind of betrayal Derek put us through." The company not only survived Derek's crimes, but actually grew stronger as a result of the experience. Our clients and investors were impressed by how we had handled the crisis, and our commitment to ethical leadership attracted new business opportunities that exceeded our previous projections. 6 months after becoming CEO, I stood in the same conference room where Derek had tried to destroy my life, addressing our quarterly board meeting with genuine optimism about our future. Our revenue had grown by 30%, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and our reputation for integrity had become a competitive advantage in winning new clients. Tommy Chen, now our Director of Information Security, had developed innovative fraud detection systems that other companies were licensing for their own protection. What happened with Derek taught us that technological sophistication has to be matched by human wisdom and ethical leadership, Tommy explained. Ryan Morrison expanded our security department to include corporate fraud prevention, working with law enforcement and other companies to identify and stop criminals like Derek before they could cause damage. The personal growth that came from surviving Derek's attacks and fighting back against injustice was perhaps the most valuable outcome of the entire ordeal. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what's right despite being terrified of the consequences. Derek Walsh was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The judge specifically noted that his systematic destruction of innocent people's careers made his crimes particularly heinous and deserving of significant punishment. During the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to address the court about the impact of Derek's crimes. "Derek Walsh didn't just steal money," I told the judge. "He stole trust, damaged careers, and traumatized employees who believed they were building something meaningful together." The financial theft was just one part of a broader pattern of emotional and psychological abuse that caused lasting harm to everyone he manipulated. As I drove home that evening, reflecting on everything that had happened since that night, when Derek sent his cowardly text message abandoning our company, I realized that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can become the foundation for the most meaningful growth. The $6 million crisis that was supposed to destroy my career had ultimately led to opportunities and personal strength I never could have imagined. Derek's attempt to frame me for his crimes had forced me to develop investigative skills, legal knowledge, and leadership capabilities that made me a better CEO than I ever would have been without facing that challenge. Most importantly, the experience taught me that standing up for truth, even when it's terrifying and the odds seem impossible, is always the right choice. Not because it guarantees success, but because it guarantees that you can look at yourself in the mirror with pride and integrity regardless of the outcome. The company Derek tried to destroy through his greed and manipulation was now stronger, more ethical, and more successful than ever before. The employees he tried to frame and intimidate were thriving in an environment built on trust and transparency. The investors he tried to deceive were earning better returns than they had expected when they first believed in our mission. Justice had been served, careers had been rebuilt, and lives had been transformed through the power of courage and truth. Derek Walsh's criminal enterprise was finished, but the positive changes that came from stopping him would benefit people for years to come. Sometimes the biggest crisis really does become the greatest opportunity when you choose courage over comfort and truth over self-preservation. That's a lesson worth remembering no matter what challenges life brings your way. What would you do if you discovered your trusted mentor was systematically destroying innocent people's lives to cover up their own crimes? Have you ever faced a situation where doing the right thing required risking everything you had worked for? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories of courage and justice, and share this with someone who needs to know that truth really can triumph over deception. Thank you for listening, and remember that your integrity is worth more than any temporary safety that comes from staying silent about wrongdoing.